Hey everyone, welcome back to the Untrivial Podcast. My name is Allie Nelson. If you're listening from Canada, I hope you had an amazing family day long weekend. We got so much snow. I didn't even leave my house all weekend. The roads were so bad. It was literally like up to my thighs in my backyard, which is just so insane. So we really just had like cozy Valentine's Day and family day weekend indoors, which I love. And it's kind of my first family day weekend as a family of my own. So that was really nice. Otherwise, I hope your week is off to a great start. This week, we are talking all about careers and career moves as we evolve and grow over the course of our lives. My guest today is Cydnee DeToy. Cydnee is a career and executive coach and speaker for high-achieving millennial women. Cydnee equips clients with the mindsets, strategies, and tools to create and thrive in a career that they want. Cydnee has helped almost 100 women reimagine their lives and has worked with clients at Meta, TikTok, PwC, numerous startups, and social impact organizations. Today, we discuss what an aligned role feels like and what the wrong role feels like, the pressure society and we as individuals put on ourselves to achieve and succeed in the workplace, questions to ask yourself to get clear on your values in a career that will match, tips to pivot into the career of your dreams, and so much more. I really enjoyed this conversation, and if you are in a place to reflect, I highly encourage you to take stock of your work and really ask yourself some of these questions. I think sometimes we forget we as millennials and Gen Zs are still so early in our careers, and there is still so much time. And so this conversation can really equip you with insights to ensure that you love what you do for the next several decades to come as well. And now, let's get into the episode. Cydnee DeToy, welcome to the Untrivial Podcast. How are you doing today?
Great. So glad to be here.
Thank you so much for coming onto the show. So you, of course, are a career coach and speaker for ambitious millennial women. But for those from the audience who are not aware of who you are, what you do, I would love if you could just share a little bit of background on yourself and how you got into the space of helping women in their careers.
Yeah, I will give you the short version because there's definitely a long version. But the short of it is I had to do a ton of introspection and experimentation over the course of 15 years to really figure out what my purpose was, how I was meant to work, what I was meant to do. And that's what makes me so passionate about helping other women do that. And so the Cliff Note version of it is started my career in public service, worked for the US Senate, had some fun and impact working for social impact organization in South Africa, went to business school, got really caught up in all of these shoulds and very practical opportunities and went right into big firm consulting. And about 3 years into that, after I had done a really long stint at a big firm and then jumped to another firm thinking it was just going to be the panacea, like the pinnacle of my career, realized it just wasn't. And I was in a path that didn't fit with me, wasn't values aligned, wasn't using my strengths, and I found just really tiring. And so sent me on a journey of exploration. I worked with a career coach and started to move into roles that were really just better suited for me. I went into people and culture role that grew into a chief of staff and a leadership role. But most importantly, I took a bet and enrolled in coach training back in 2019 and really realized that that's where my heart was. And so built up my business slowly on the side. And about a year and a half ago, bet on that. And here I am doing it full time now. And I think it's doing the work of my life.
Oh, that's amazing. It's such an inspiring story, too, of having leaned on a career coach, leaned on someone in this space, and then saying, hang on, I think I love that, and being able to move to the other side. That's so cool.
Yeah. It was also really cool because I have a hunch that I have a handful of clients that I've worked with who might be calling me in 5 years to say, I'm also coaching.
Yeah, that's incredible. So it sounds like you have done a whole host of different things in your career. And I think a lot of people, a lot of women start somewhere and end up somewhere totally different. And one thing I wanted to talk with you about is how young we are when we make those first decisions about our careers. You know, a lot of people choose to go into post-secondary school and you're 18 at the time. And it's like, how do you even know where to start, where to study, and to make such a big decision, or at least it feels big at the moment, that it's going to impact your career for such a long time ahead. How do you feel about the fact that we have to make those decisions so young? And do you think it means as much for our career once we do finally get into the workforce as people think it does when they're making that choice?
Oh my gosh, there's so much pressure put
Yeah.
up. So much pressure. And I feel like it actually starts with the question we get asked sometime around 5 years old, which is, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm of two minds. One is I sort of wish we could blow up the entire way we think about careers when we're 18 or 19 going to college, or when we're in our early 20s, and make it so much more, instead of focusing on where can you find training, where can you get growth opportunities, what's going to set you up for future success. Focus on who you are, what you're good at, what's going to feel aligned and purposeful. And I think there's value to doing something that isn't right for you, or doing 2 or 3 things that totally isn't right for you, and learning from that, and then using those learning experiments to really get closer to what you want to do. And so, as much as I think we could totally shift the way that we think about careers, I also think it's okay that it is putting people on paths that may be less fulfilling, because it's only going to help them get closer to what they want to do. And you don't learn or figure out what you're really good at until you're in the workplace and you're doing the work and you're talking to people and getting feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like so much of post-secondary, I think for some people who have a really clear picture of, say, I want to be a doctor or I want to be an engineer, and it's a very specific designation, specific path, you want to do that, like, that's awesome. And I think there's like a clear, staircase to that destination. Whereas, the thing I try and remind myself too is, like, a lot of people go into business that's so broad. You could do anything with a business degree or an English degree or a general arts degree. Like, one thing what you're saying about taking off the pressures, like, just because you pick a stream, if you intentionally pick something kind of broad and general, it can keep paths and doors open for you as well. But similarly, you're right. Like, even if you do go in mind with, I want to be a doctor, and you get all the way through and then you decide it's not right for you, it's like, okay, now we've learned that path might not be the right fit. So how do we pivot, and what's next?
Yeah. And I think the important thing to remember too, because I have talked to so many people who get to that point where they've put in a decade of training or work only to find that that is the wrong path. And then they feel so defeated. Like, I have to start over. I wasted all this time. And I think the really important thing to remember is you've never wasted time. Every single experience you've had is building towards something. And even if you can't see a very literal interpretation of that, like you went to med school and now you're not going to be a doctor, you went to med school and then maybe you're going to go into a public health role, or you went to med school and you learned how to do great research and now you want to go into research, or you went to med school and you learned how to connect with a wide variety of patients and now you're going to go into something that has to do with interpersonal skills. And so it's just appreciating and really embracing that you've still learned and grown no matter what you were doing.
That's such a great point too, because I definitely think even for younger people, like, switching a major, for example, feels huge. But now that I'm in the workforce, I'm kind of like 10 years past that, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like the smallest little blip. Like, you're still in school, you still can, like, graduate on time or maybe a year later. Like, that's not a huge kind of setback compared to, again, it's not a setback, but if you're thinking about someone who's really given 10, 15 years of their career in one specific domain, like apples and oranges, like totally different things for sure.
Yeah.
Um, and so, obviously we're making those decisions young. We get into the workforce. What are some initial signs that you are either in the right type of role or you're not the right type of role? Like what does that feel like?
Yeah. Such a good question. I would say so funny because your question's making the way you asked it is making me think in a different way than I usually do. Because usually I get the question of how do you know you're in the wrong role? But how do you know you're in the right role? And, what signals do we use to identify that? And I think it's when it's going to be slightly different for everyone, but when you feel energy, you feel creative, you feel like you're thinking about it outside of work, not because you're stressed, but because you're so interested in the topic or the idea. It feels easy. You feel like you can be good at it without a ton of effort and hustle. I think all of those feelings I just described are going to be really hard to identify unless you've been in the wrong role. Because the wrong role is essentially the converse, and it feels like a slog. You have to work so hard to master it. It's draining your energy. It maybe just feels like you're forcing a round peg into a square hole or whatever the saying is. And it just doesn't fit. But I think that it's really, sometimes we spend so much time working and we're just in it. And I think we're in the day to day. We get up in the morning, we're in our routine, we go to work, we come home. And sometimes we don't even notice or have the time or are conscious enough to pay attention to those cues. And so I think it's worth everyone spending a little time. Maybe it's on the weekend, maybe it's once a quarter, just reflecting. Does it feel like I'm getting those signals I'm in the right role? Or do I need to take these signals that I'm in the wrong role more seriously?
No, that's a really great point. And just as you were talking there, it made me wonder the difference between the wrong company and the wrong position. Because I think I've definitely felt personally some of those things of like, oh, this is so hard, or I'm not having a good day, or it's just been the wrong company culture. Maybe you have a really challenging manager. But how do you tell the difference of those feelings where you might be having a really hard time in that position, but it might not be the role that you're doing? That might be the right thing, but you're at the wrong company, you're with the wrong team. Like, what's the difference there?
Yeah, that is so hard to nail down or get specific on. And I think the difference is paying attention to how you feel at different moments of the day. And how do you feel doing your core job responsibility? So when you sit at your desk in the morning and you're going through your to-do list, or you're responding to emails, or you're presenting in a meeting, how does that feel? Is it just challenging? Is it taking so much emotional and mental energy to get the task done? That's going to help you figure out if you're in the wrong role. And then the cues about the company are, how do you feel interacting with the people around you? How do you feel coming out of the conversation with your boss? How do you feel when you're reading a firm-wide email, interacting with the process, attending an all-staff meeting? And those are going to be the reactions that answer the question, am I at the wrong company? I also think sometimes, am I at the wrong company, can be easier to figure out, because when there's real values disalignment, you feel it in a really visceral way.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of values, I know we're talking a little bit about maybe these decisions that were made when we're younger, but given my listeners are primarily a little bit later in their careers, 25 to 35, say we've been in our career for a little while now, and we want to do that assessment of whether or not the role aligns with our values. Like, are there any questions you get your clients to ask themselves to figure out, does this really align with me? Maybe people haven't really done that self-reflection yet, but where could they start in terms of what do they self-reflect about?
Yep. Such a fantastic question. So I think about your values and the things that define you as a professional as your operating principles. And I define your operating principles as a mix of your values, your priorities, and your anchors that feel so good to you. When you are working in a way that's aligned with your operating principles, you feel grounded, you feel on purpose, you feel at ease, fulfilled. And I like to think of it as sort of creating your own DNA chain around your career, your own DNA sequence around what you need to feel fulfilled. Sometimes career exploration defaults to passing you a list of 50 common values and asking you to identify your top 10. And to really deeply get at what's important to you, you have to come at it in a little bit more creative way. And so I love to ask questions like, if you could wake up on a Tuesday morning and talk about, work on, do anything that you'd like to do, what would you do? How would you spend your day? If your career was a saved folder on Instagram or your top 10 most followed podcasts, what topics are you most excited about? What do you feel naturally drawn towards? If money were no object, what would you do, be, or have? What do you want in your life in 10 years that you don't have today? And questions that get you to think a little bit more expansively, and then look for the common themes there. And those are going to be your operating principles or the pieces that are really, really important to you in your career.
I love that. I loved all of those questions, and it just got my wheels turning. And one of the things you said, if you could wake up on a Tuesday morning, what would you do? And one of the things was like, oh, I would love to go to the gym. And like, that's how some people start. And it made me wonder about career versus hobbies. And so much of what I hear sometimes is, pursue your passion, pursue what you love, and you'll never work a day in your life. And I definitely believe that. But I've also encountered people who have told me there's absolutely space for passions and hobbies, and it doesn't necessarily need to be your career. And so I guess, what are your thoughts on that? And what do you recommend to your clients in terms of, if they have hobbies that they really like, do you recommend that they move that into more of their career and their profession? Or what would be an instance where it's like, no, keep that as a hobby and do something else as your career?
Yeah, I think the answer is so personal. And there's a couple of different factors at play that get you to the right answer for each individual person. And what you're describing as the hobbies are usually topics. And so I work with a lot of clients, a lot who are passionate about wellness, a lot who are passionate about travel, a lot who are passionate about women's health and healthcare more generally. And those translate to the industry. And I find for most people, what defines if they feel good and fulfilled at work and if they're successful is their function. And so if you're thinking about, do I make my hobby a passion? Yeah, maybe it is the right industry for you, but also don't forget to really focus on the function. And are you going to enjoy the day-to-day work? And so if you're thinking about, I love travel, does that means you could start your own travel company, or you could go work for a major hotel chain doing marketing, and really think about which of those is going to feel most right to you.
Yeah, no, that's so helpful. And I think the industry is such an interesting point too, because I think a lot of people that I know of, or at least sometimes the way that I think about even my work, is my job function is my skills that I like and I know I'm good at, but I feel more of my purpose is aligned to that overall industry. Like, do I believe in the mission of the company? Do I believe in, is that business, or is the team that I'm working on, or is that industry doing good for the world? And I think a lot of people, especially our age, really want their job to hold purpose and meaning and feel like it is bettering society in some way or they're making a positive difference. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I just underscore that 100%. I think that is such a defining feature of our generation where we want to do work that feels meaningful. And what I found with my clients is meaning can be exactly as you described, have a positive impact on the world. And for other people, it can be having a positive impact on the other people within their organization or improving something, improving a product, improving a process, as long as it feels like you get to wake up every day and do something meaningful, purposeful, tangible that you can really feel and see.
Definitely. I'm sure you've heard of the theory of like ikigai and like that whole belief of your perfect job or your perfect role is a combination of what you're good at, what the world needs, and like what can make you money. I think those are the things that make up ikigai. Do you recommend people think in terms of those three pillars? And does money making or finance ever come into your conversations as well?
Yeah, it's so funny. I have not heard of that exact framework, but resonates. I usually think about it as the intersection of what you're good at, so same as that, what you care about, and your operating principles. So the pieces that are really going to impact how you feel on a day-to-day basis and if this is the right work for you. I like to figure out what those three pieces are and then check if it's going to make you the right money and check if there's going to be opportunities there in 10 years and check to see how AI is impacting the industry.
Right. Yeah, because I think that's something too that maybe holds a lot of people back is like, I would love to do this type of role, but I'm not confident it's going to give me enough financial stability to make that my full-time thing. Or I'm really passionate about this, but I don't even think there's a career to be made out of it. And I think a lot of times there is, but maybe it is a little bit more difficult. It's not standard. It's not as common. And I totally understand people feeling maybe fear of jumping into something that feels maybe hobby and values aligned, but they're scared that it won't be able to support themselves or their family.
Yeah. And I totally get that. And I once heard someone say that there are experts and millionaires in every single industry. And truly, you can think about that. You go into tennis and you can make millions of dollars. You can be an executive assistant and you could be the best one there and you're going to make hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it's about trusting that if you're going into the industry and the type of work that you're really good at and so passionate about, that you'll rise to the top and you'll be able to make the type of money or whatever it is that is your financial goal that feels worth it and lucrative. It's just sometimes those paths are less known than if you climb the ladder at your corporate job and you know exactly what the pay scale is and where you'll be in 10 years.
Yeah, totally. So say you are somebody who is in their career, they've been there maybe between 5 and 10 years at this point. They are thinking that it might not be the right fit for them or they're feeling unfulfilled. They've asked themselves those questions. I think a lot of people are very fearful of the pivot and pivoting out of something that they, as you mentioned before, they've dedicated all this time, potentially education to. They've built up their credibility. Maybe they're in a managerial position, and the thought of pivoting and quote unquote starting over or starting from something more junior is really, really scary. Could set them back financially as well. Like could just totally change everything. What is your advice for people who are afraid to make that pivot? And is there anything you feel could make that pivot easier to do?
The first thing I would remind yourself is that your career is probably going to be 4 to 5 decades long, and you're in the first quarter. And
Right.
so ask yourself, do you want to be unfulfilled for the rest of the game, the next 3 quarters, or do you want to pivot and make a change that's going to set you up for the rest? And I think that's the place to start, because that's really going to help you realize, do I feel enough conviction that I need to make a change? And then use that to go forward. And then when you're making the pivot, get really honest and specific with yourself about what your transferable skills are. Because as I said before, the doctor example, you're always going to have transferable skills, and then frame them in the language of the role or the industry that you're trying to pivot into, so that the people who are hiring you on the other side of the interview can really see your potential and why you're going to be the right fit and be able to make the pivot. So that's one thing, like really, really laser in on what your transferable skills are. Two is see if there's ways in which you can put some of the experience, the place that you want to pivot, on your resume now, so you can signal to the hiring manager that you actually do already have some experience. And so that might be volunteering, it might be getting a side hustle, it might be some board service. I always find when I dig into this with clients, like they always have something relevant that they haven't thought about. And then the last thing I would think about is you can pivot into a new industry, or you can pivot into a new function. It's really hard to do both at the same time, both to get hired in a new job, because that is a bigger bet the hiring manager would have to take on you, but also to make that leap to be successful. So think about, if you do want to pivot to a new industry and a new function, pick one to pivot on first and consider it a bridge job, a bridge from here to your end destination. And that'll also be a lot easier for you to do.
Yeah. I think that's a really helpful reminder, especially tying it back to the fact that we have so many decades to work. Like, you can take a baby step before moving into your next step that is, say, 100% aligned versus 60% aligned. And I think that's really helpful to remember. I love that advice.
I'll also just add, I think there's something about our generation. We want to do meaningful work, and we feel like our careers are a sprint. Like we have to be successful in the first 10 or 15 years. And for some reason, we just can't wrap our heads around or fully appreciate that we are running this long-term marathon, and we have time to get to where we need to go. Our careers are long.
Yeah, absolutely. I try and remind myself of that too, because sometimes I'll think, I'm not where I want to be. And it's like, well, if I was where I wanted to be, what would I do for the next 30 years after that? Yeah, it's a long game. I guess on that note, when we're thinking about this idea of it being a sprint, I know personally, and a lot of my friends have, really succumbed to that like grinding hustle culture that really paves a really easy path towards burnout, and burnout being a thing that happens to us in those careers, whether they're the right fit or the wrong fit. Like, if you are just going nose to the grindstone and working like 50, 60 hours a week, even if you love it, I think that would be really, really hard on a lot of people. And so how do you recommend people balance their work, their personal life, and just making sure that they don't get into that burned out phase where, they might need to take a break or pause entirely?
This one is hard, because I think there's some systemic things at play, some cultural things at play, and then there's the individual piece. And I think there is a cultural piece in that some jobs and industries, like if you're a lawyer, if you're a banker, if you're a consultant, are just going to have a incredible workload. And so just gotta know what you're signing up for when you go into those. And then on an individual level, I think I'm going to say this, and I think it's hard for people to hear until they're actually in it, which is to a certain extent, almost like where you have to test the jobs that you don't like to find the right ones. I sometimes think you do have to work hard and hustle to then figure out what the right balance and the right workload is, because you and I could sit here and tell someone who's 25 or 30, pace yourself and make sure that you have balance and you have activities and passions outside of work. But when you're in that moment and you want to prove yourself and you see the people around you hustling, you're not going to be able to hear that. And so you have to probably do it, touch the flame of burnout, and then figure out what the right balance is for you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like you have to push your limits to understand where they are, and then you can kind of scale back from there. I can totally relate to that for sure.
I wish it wasn't that way, but I think that's probably just the reality.
Yeah. I think too, especially for high achievers, because it's like,
Yeah.
say say you were in a job that you weren't super passionate about. I don't think you'll probably get to the point of burning out. If you don't care a lot and it's fine and it's whatever, then maybe you will be fine at finding balance and making sure you're leaving on time and spending time with family. But for those really high achievers who want to perform and want to excel and want to progress, like I think they might have a tougher time working in all of those other important factors of life without kind of testing that limit for sure.
Yeah. And I think we're raised and conditioned in a way where we, society, but also a lot of our parents, a lot of our peers, place so much emphasis on working hard. And I think at a certain period in our life, the friend who's super busy at work is valued or respected. And so that just, I think, fuels that internal pressure, that high achieving drive we feel even more. And it's like you're getting the external pressure and the internal pressure, and you're just working hard until you figure out you need to pull back a little bit more.
Yeah, that made me just think about how I think there is an element of, yeah, a sense of pride in what you do, a sense of like maybe your ego driving a little bit of that. Like we want the high title, we want the big paycheck, we want to feel successful in the workplace in our own right, for sure. Totally normal to want all those things, but really hard maybe if you're comparing yourself to someone who you maybe ascribe as doing better than you in those degrees. And it's like, how do we not feel like our self-worth is attached to our our job title in a way? It's like we're still whole and great and wonderful people on our own in our own right without needing to be like a CEO to feel that way. Have you ever encountered clients who struggle with that?
100%. I would feel like that is one of the core topics that I wrestle with clients. And I think that there's a few really simple, easy fixes, and then there's some deeper inner work. And an easy fix is find something else to do outside of work. Find something that you're passionate about, or just give yourself an activity or a hobby so that you're getting a sense of self-worth and your own internal validation from putting time and creativity and energy towards this thing. And then the inner work is remembering that you are a multifaceted human who gets to, on a daily basis, show up and bring value to the world. And your other identities are a mom, a sister, a daughter, an aunt, a friend, a good neighbor. And all of those things have nothing to do with your day job, but create such immense value for the people around you who get to benefit from you being the thoughtful person that you are. And the reason I say it's inner work is we all know that intellectually, and the work is really fully trusting and believing that you are valuable for all of those reasons that have nothing to do with the job on your LinkedIn profile or on your resume.
Yeah, that's so well said. And I think kind of related, but I do believe social media has a little bit of a part to play in just that comparison game and that idea that we're behind or we're behind in life or
Yeah.
behind other people, and that kind of being a driver to strive even harder, look for success even more, to feel like you're not falling behind your peers. And so that just struck a chord with me.
Yeah, it's so funny because there's such I think we could all accept that Instagram is really bad for comparison
Yes.
and we see everyone's highlight reel and we doom scroll. I've been thinking recently that LinkedIn is just as bad because you
Yeah.
see
Oh yeah.
people's highlight reel and someone just got promoted and someone was on this panel and someone was interviewed for this, this, and this.
For sure.
And you're just sitting there also doom scrolling. And so I think you're so right that social media can be so challenging. And even when we think it's something innocuous, like this professional social network, it's actually not. And we just need to be mindful of either what we're consuming or what meaning we're ascribing to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I would almost say LinkedIn might be a little bit worse, to be honest, because even though Instagram is a highlight reel, I do feel like there are a lot of people who do show real life and real life things on stories, and like there is the highlights, but there's also some like mundane day to day, which is nice. Whereas Instagram, I feel like you only post on Instagram when you've been
Yeah.
promoted, when you've got a new
Yep.
certification, when you've taken a new job, whatever it is, it's only going to be this positive thing for a lot of people. I don't think I've ever posted anything negative on Instagram or on LinkedIn before, excuse
Yeah.
me. So that's extra tough. And it's specifically related to success, like you could
Yeah.
just scroll and scroll and scroll and just say, like, see people like winning, I did a great thing, I got a new job. And gosh, you're right, that might be even worse.
And to your point, everyone looks good. They're at the conference in their
Yeah,
business
suit
cash.
and tie.
Their hair done. Yeah, it's like the best picture. You're getting no screenshots of them sitting behind their laptop in their workout clothes on a Friday morning, maybe with dirty hair. So I think
Right.
you're totally right. It's just the polished, best professional version you can get of someone.
Totally. We were talking a little bit about being a whole person and making space and room for the different facets of your life and who you are. And it definitely made me think about the time in a lot of women's lives and careers where they are going to potentially take a bit of a step towards family life. And that might involve taking maternity leave for a many number of months. Some people stay at home for years, and how that might feel difficult, A, when you're exiting the workforce if you plan to have a child, and B, when you are returning and how that might feel after you've had a family. So, do you ever work with women kind of in that stage of life where they're reevaluating or evaluating their career as they step into this new phase of their personal life, which is motherhood and family?
Yeah, always. And I think what's fascinating about it is it it causes a huge fundamental shift, realignment in their operating principles or their values in a way that can be hard to reconcile or really accept. And a really specific example is the prioritization of career or their identity around ambition, which I've witnessed for some clients, not all, because it's different. I feel like a broken record, but as a coach, I have to say it's different for each client. But for many women, they spend the first decade of their career from their 20s to their 30s being purely career focused, going for achievement and growth and promotion and success. And that just changes when they get to the cusp of family planning. And it's like letting go of an identity and being okay with this realignment, this focus on family, both for themselves. And then I also think being okay to talk about it and share it externally. I think what I've observed is that a lot of women can feel sometimes like there's so much external pressure. It's not okay to be shifting their priorities, doing work or roles that are going to give them the time and space to show up and be the mom that they want.
Yeah, it's definitely such an interesting time of life. And I think when you and I spoke earlier, you were talking about women wanting to make sure they're in the right
Yeah.
role or right job before they go off on leave, and that being of importance to them. Can you speak a little bit on that?
Yeah. It's, I would say, this unique inflection point where either right before women start to think about building their families, family planning, or when they're on maternity leave, feeling like, okay, my life is about to go through a massive disruption over the next 2 to 3 years. And I'm working in a way that really doesn't feel aligned to me right now. It's either the workload's crazy, I don't agree with the company culture, I'm not in the right day-to-day role. And so I really care and want to be intentional about my career. And so I need to make this change now so that I have the foundation in place and I feel like I can be here and I can have stability in my career and be building and feel aligned while I also care for my newborn and expand my family.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely feel I feel that personally, and even now being on maternity leave myself, it's like, oh, my values completely did shift, and it's like you're almost on the other end of knowing what it feels like to have that self-reflection and questioning, and am I in the right role? Am I doing the
Yeah.
right thing? And being at that point where you don't have a lot of time and space because you're caring for a baby, but you do have a little bit more just to think about career because you've taken a step back from it. And so you're like, okay, let's really think if I'm going back, and maybe women are questioning that when they're on maternity leave, like if I'm going back, am I happy about where I'm going back to, about what I'm going to be doing, and what that all looks like on the other side of this massive change.
It's amazing what you can see clearly with the little bit of distance. And what
Yeah.
I would also say is I work with a lot of women who aren't moms or aren't close to being moms yet, and they have a similar reckoning in their early 30s too. It's almost like, I don't know, I've heard a lot about your quarter life crisis and your
Right.
midlife crisis that happens sometimes between 40 and 50. And I think there's also this resetting and reassessment and realignment in our early 30s too that doesn't get as much attention but is so widely shared. And I think it's shifting from being so career focused to wanting to be really successful but also be this whole person with this full meaningful life and making
Yeah.
changes to make that happen.
Yeah. We need to normalize like your third of life crisis.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Somewhere between the age of 30 and 33. Yep.
For
I mean,
sure.
that's exactly how old I was when I started making massive changes to my career. And
Yeah.
most of my clients are probably right within that sweet spot.
Well, it makes sense too when you use the word holistic, because it is for a lot of women the time when your life becomes a little bit fuller in different spheres. If you do get married, if you have children, you've got your career, like there just needs to be more room and more balance for other things if those other things are a part of your life. Plus you want hobbies, plus you want to see your friends, plus you want to
Yeah.
maybe travel. Like there's a lot to fit in there, and it's really
Yeah.
hard to make
Yeah.
room for it all.
Totally. And I think there must be something about, oh, when I was in high school and in college, I feel like I did have that full life. And I put some of those things on hold for the past 10 years, and now I want to get them back.
Yeah.
For me, the biggest thing was I loved reading growing up and then essentially stopped reading because I didn't have a second to do it. And then when I was resetting and realigning, I started reading again. And I feel like it
Yeah.
transformed my life.
Yeah, I love that. I was always envious of people who maintained their hobbies in their 20s. I don't know. For me, they just all went out the window too. Like I
Hey.
didn't really have them. And then I think once I turned 30, I was like, I need to have more hobbies. Like, what have I been doing? And it's been so nice to like reintegrate things for fun and things for joy that aren't just kind of like hanging out with your friends or watching TV. Because I
Yeah.
was very much in that cycle. It was like work, friends, shows, and do that all over again.
It's so funny. I think that is such a common shared experience. But where's the conversation about this third life
Yeah.
crisis?
Yeah, totally. I liked what you were saying too about the idea of taking a bit of distance because
Mm.
I think that is such a great way to pause and take a step back and take a look. And I think it's pretty challenging to do that when you do have a 9 to 5 and it's constantly going and maybe you only get 2 or 3 weeks vacation a year and want to spend it traveling. Like, what's your advice in terms of making space for that reflection, or how much space do you think people need? Or if someone wants to get curious about their career and their alignment, how can they take a step back with those questions you had that I think are phenomenal? But like, how do you recommend they take stock and can take that breath to think about it?
Yeah. I think the best thing you could do is probably a quarterly check-in with yourself, a Sunday afternoon with your notebook at a coffee shop, checking in on your career and probably all different facets of your life. That's on an ongoing basis if you have a lot of foresight. I think when you're in the moment, in the midst of a busy day job, no vacation in sight, I think just start small. Don't sit down and say, okay, I'm unhappy and I need to figure out what's next and make a change tomorrow. Start with some of those questions I suggested, like, how would you spend a Tuesday? What would you do if you had no money? And just do a little bit every day or every week and see what comes up. Just reflecting, taking stock in your journal, voice memos, talking to a trusted friend, whatever is your preferred mode of processing. And over time, you'll get the answers.
Yeah, absolutely. I so appreciate that. If listeners could take one thing away from you, your message, our conversation today, what would you want it to be?
I would say trust that you are always evolving. And so even if you might not be in the perfect place and feel totally fulfilled and aligned today, you're still learning, you're still figuring out what is meant for you, and you're going to take that information forward. And if you're changing or your values are shifting or you're feeling some sort of major restructuring in your life, it's just because we're evolving. And I think we put so much pressure on ourselves to be sure and to be in a state of stability or to be constant. And I think if we just give ourselves the freedom to know that we're always evolving and we're always evolving forward, we will give ourselves a lot more freedom and a lot more grace.
I love that. And also, you just made me think like our careers are going to change like 50 times over. Even this conversation is so funny because I feel like we're talking about, oh, we put all this pressure on ourselves. And it's like, we're putting all this pressure on ourselves right now to like make this one right choice. But it's like, you're going to make 20 different choices. And
Totally.
those career changes are going to keep happening because we are going to keep evolving. Our values are going to keep shifting. Our skills are going to keep developing. Like we're going to zigzag and change careers so many times over the course of our lives. It's such a, oh my God, point we haven't gotten to yet.
And we just are getting to know ourselves better too. Literally every single year that passes, we learn more about ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think I used to believe that careers are linear. It's like you're a
Yeah.
coordinator and then you're a specialist and then you're a manager and then you're a senior manager and you go all the way up this little chart in the exact same function for your entire life until you're at the top. And it's like, that's not the way the world works. Not
Yeah.
necessarily.
Yep. For some people in our parents' generation, but totally. It's like, and instead of the career ladder, we're all on the general gym. Every single one of us is on the general gym nowadays.
That is an amazing analogy. I love that. Our career jungle gym over the course of our life. That is
Yeah.
so true. Perfect. Where can listeners learn more about you, get connected, get in touch?
Yeah. So connect with me on LinkedIn. You can just search for my profile, first name, last name. I post there almost daily talking about our careers, and would also love to have you join my newsletter where I send out weekly notes with personal essays, thoughtful topics, client examples all around career and living intentionally.
Oh my goodness. Cydnee, thank you so much for coming on the show today. You are so inspirational and such a wealth of knowledge. I think you're going to help so many people figuring out their next steps in their career.
Thanks for having me, Allie. What a fantastic conversation.